What are you talking about? Spaceships? Talking monkeys? You're out of your mind. That's Saturday morning cereals. Get out of here.
During World War II, Planet of the Apes author Pierre Boulle was an engineer who served La Resistance. He trained to blow up bridges, but was captured and sent to a political prison and forced to hard labor. While there, he would write stories on scraps of paper, but they were always confiscated. After 2 years of survival, he escaped and went back to a dull life working on a rubber plantation. One restless night, he sat up and said never again. He wanted to be a writer, and he knew nothing about it, but he didn't care. It was what he wanted, so he left the job the next morning. I made the ridiculous oath to never again undertake any other measures besides writing. Pierre sold everything he owned and budgeted his money for 2 years of survival, living on only the essentials. In 1950, his first book, William Conrad, was published. Boulle continued writing, and in 1952, he wrote the breakout novel Bridge on the River Kwai, which was turned into a stunning film starring Alec Guinness in 1957. He would go on to win 7 Academy Awards. Pierre would visit the zoo often, and he was intrigued by the human-like expressions on the animals' faces there. He wondered about the relationship of man and ape, and from that contemplation came the Planet of the Apes, which he wrote in 6 months. In 1963, he released Planet of the Apes. In the United Kingdom, it was called Monkey Planet. It is the year 2500, and 2 travelers find a message in a bottle tells the tale of a French journalist, Ulysse Mehu, who is a passenger on a space voyage. After orbiting their ship around a planet, they launch a shuttle. They land on what seems an Earth-like planet and are captured by apes, like the film. What made the book so different is that Ulysse spends months caged, and he has to learn the ape language through Zira. While he does this, he is caged with Nova and is intimate with her. Some of the apes are fascinated with Ulysse, who can speak, and he takes his case to the populace in court with the support of Zira and Cornelius. Ulysse wins the case and is accepted amongst the apes like a star. He is allowed clothes, a place to stay, and travels with Cornelius, who is promoted to the head scientist of the society. It is on one outing that Cornelius and Ulysse find a human doll that talks. The most disturbing thing about this book is how callous Ulysse is. He has no problem leaving Nova in a cage while he lives in comfort in his own apartment in the ape community. In fact, in the novel, he states that since he is considered civilized now, he is embarrassed by his intimacy with her and worries about favoritism with the other caged humans. So he finds himself giving her less attention. He is a real cad. It is discovered that Nova is pregnant, and she is hidden away after one brain experiment causes a human to talk about how apes took over human society. The rival orangutan, Dr. Zaius, returns to take power, and both Cornelius and Zira are losing power. In an effort to help Ulysse, Nova, and their young son, who is speaking, they are given the opportunity to escape. The orbiting ship that Ulysse arrived in has been discovered, and they intend to launch a satellite with 3 humans as test subjects. Ulysse and his family will be the ones picked. They escape, get aboard the ship, and head for home. When they arrive at Earth, they land and are horrified to discover that the military that greets them in France is comprised of apes. During the 60s, film producer Arthur P. Jacobs would often travel to other countries hoping to find properties to adapt into films for his new company, APJAC Productions, which just had success with the 1964 What a Way to Go, with Paul Newman, Shirley MacLaine, Robert Mitchum, Dean Martin, Dick Van Dyke, and Gene Kelly. The film made a profit, and he began looking for his second big hit. Boulle's literary agent remembered that Jacobs wanted to make something like King Kong and thought Planet of the Apes was worth bringing up. To his surprise, Jacobs optioned the film rights in 1963. In order to tempt studios to make the film, Jacobs tried to convince Marlon Brando to be the lead, but studios did not bite. When Brando stated he didn't understand the script, Paul Newman was spoken to, and he showed interest, but studios still would not commit. By early 1964, Jacobs was defeated and wrote Boulle and his literary agent that they needed to reevaluate Apes. Despite the failures to date, he assured the Frenchman that he was still working on it. Graciously, the Frenchman decided to stick with Jacobs after all his efforts, and said they would not sell it from under him. They gave Jacobs 4 more months if he paid $3,000, which was 5% of the asking price for the film rights. Famous director Blake Edwards read the book and loved it. Edwards was huge in Hollywood as a writer and director with strings of hits like Operation Petticoat, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and most recently The Pink Panther. When Edwards and Jacobs sat down for lunch, they both wanted to make a deal. Edwards clinched everything, and Warner Brothers signed enthusiastically to make the movie on February 27, 1964. The first person Jacobs had in mind to write the screenplay was Rod Serling, who is now a huge name thanks to his Twilight Zone series. On May 25, 1964, Serling turned in his first draft. In Serling's script, when the 3 astronauts land on the planet, they find the humans and debate about how they will be leaders of this planet in no time. Then a car engine sounds and they see a Jeep drive up with 2 apes in it. The main astronaut, named Thomas, laughs as a volley of bullets sound. Thomas is wounded in the neck, and one of his astronauts is killed immediately. The ape hunters think Thomas might be a domesticated human because he is wearing clothes, so they specifically keep him alive to take back for possible reward. Like the movie, he is taken to a zoo where Zira is, and he tries to communicate by writing but fails. Zaius also arrives and suggests that Thomas have a lobotomy rather than bother with him. Thomas then escapes in a vehicle and ends up in a city with police chasing him before eventually being recaptured. Thomas does communicate with Zira, but he is scheduled for lobotomy, and as the procedure begins, this is when Thomas yells out, "No, get away, leave me alone." Thomas is brought before the council where the president attends, and he states he is peaceful and hopes they are as well, and tells them of Earth. Thomas is then treated like a celebrity amongst the apes. Zira is Thomas's guide to the new world where church is mandatory and there is a system of apprenticeship for future ape careers. Taylor gets lonely, finds Nova, and clothes her. 5 weeks later, Thomas invites Zira and Zaius to his apartment for tea, and Nova is there. While serving the apes, Nova reveals Thomas has been training her to speak by saying, "Would you care for lemon or cream, Doctor?" There is a sequence with a human doll that says Mama, and this scene has Thomas arriving to confab with Zaius and Cornelius about the find. Zaius admits that man had a civilization, but does not understand where it went. Then Thomas explains nuclear war and how the apes inherited their traits from man by copying their methodology. This causes panic in certain circles in the ape community. One of the 3 original astronauts that landed on the planet wakes up in a cage and tries to communicate, but he is beaten by apes. An assassination attempt is also tried on Thomas, but he escapes by going into the jungle. The astronaut that woke up in a cage has now been lobotomized and is used as bait to trap Thomas. When he comes to his comrade, he is captured and put into a cage again. Zira tells Thomas she has hid Nova and shows him a newspaper that states to the public that Thomas was deemed a mechanical man by the Scientific Academy. To back up this ridiculous claim, Zaius arrives with a mechanical Thomas who says, "I'm John Thomas from the planet Earth." Zira then sneaks Thomas and Nova to the landed spacecraft so they can flee to space. As they leave, Zira states, "Go with God, Mr. Thomas." That's an old expression. It comes from both ape and man. At the end of the film, Zaius informs Zira that the ship has left orbit, and Zira is happy, exclaiming that if they survive and start again, they have it within their power to make a good world. At least they should have a chance. Serling wanted the tone of his script to be analogous to the segregation of America. But in the film, the astronauts are the ones being segregated, and thus the audience would experience it through the main characters as they are caged and mistreated by a callous society. Serling would later say in 1967, "The singular evil of our time is prejudice. It is from this evil that all other evils grow and multiply. In almost everything I have written, there is was a thread of this, man's seemingly palpable need to dislike someone other than himself. This theme would become paramountly larger as the film went on, but we will get into that later. Production trudged along, with artists making concepts while Serling wrote a second draft, which was going slow. In September 1964, Jacobs told Edwards that the Maurice agency was pushing Jack Lemmon to play Thomas, even though Paul Newman was still the popular choice. It was also noted that Rock Hudson was interested in the lead role as well. Shortly after, Newman bowed out of the running, and Warner Brothers began backing off of the film and stated that more expenditures were not permitted due to lack of faith in the project. Things got worse when principal photography was pushed back from December 31st, 1964 to August 31st, 1965. But Edwards was getting anxious, especially because they hadn't cast anything, and Serling's second draft was late. In mid-December, Serling turned in a working second draft. Refinements were made quickly, and on January 7, 1965, a revised rough draft was turned in officially. In this draft, a fourth astronaut was included, but this one died in hibernation as it was in the final film. They then land and use a futuristic tractor to travel, and they come across the ape scarecrows. After their tractor sinks in quicksand, they come across the humans, and the ape hunt occurs. Thomas speaks before the lobotomy procedure. He is brought before the council, and he is treated with some civility. This doesn't last long after the dig site is discovered with humans, and in this site, a raid shelter is discovered with skeletons inside. An assassination attempt against Thomas occurs, but he escapes. Thomas returns to his ship, but it is inoperable. Then Zira, Cornelius, and Zaius show up and tell him Nova has been returned to her people, and that Thomas needs to go there as well. Zaius and Thomas debate humanity, and then the human escapes in a helicopter. As he flies, he spots the Statue of Liberty, realizing, to his horror, that he is home. The later revised draft actually had Thomas killed. Zira and Cornelius tried to help Thomas escape, and they land by a jungle for him to run to. Thomas, stunned by the sight, walks towards guerrillas who have their guns raised, and they shoot him dead. Zira and Cornelius ask Zaius what Thomas meant by his words. Then the camera pans back to reveal what Thomas saw, the Statue of Liberty, and the film ends. By the time the third draft of the script came out, everything fell apart. On March 8, 1965, it came out that the budget for the film was estimated around 11 to 14 million, which was very high for the time, and the studio did not like that at all. Blake Edwards wanted the film to be the best it could, and therefore would not make it for less. So both Edwards and the studio abandoned the project abruptly. Amazingly, Arthur Jacobs must have sensed all this coming, because 2 months earlier he talked to budding film director Franklin Schaffner about the film, and Schaffner was also close to Charleton Heston. Schaffner worked on television and made his first feature film called The Stripper in 1963, and then made The Best Man with Henry Fonda. Schaffner was intrigued by Apes. So by the time Edwards left the project, Jacobs already had a backup in mind. Jacobs did try other directors as well. Sidney Pollack said no, and so did Irvin Kershner. On March 10th, 1965, in a Variety article, it was announced that Warner Brothers has postponed Planet of the Apes due to budgeting and production problems, and that the setback cancels the services of Blake Edwards. With no director, no studio, no writer, no actors, the project was dead, but Jacobs kept at it. He even asked original author Boulle to take a try at the script as he respected his input. However, Boulle didn't agree with the idea of the astronauts being on Earth and was not enthusiastic about changes from his original novel, so that script never got past the hunt part of the film. All seemed lost, but on June 5th, 1965, Jacobs sat down with Charleton Heston. Heston served in World War II as well, like the author of Planet of the Apes, but he flew several B-25 missions just north of Japan. He made staff sergeant, but one day when a plane crash landed, Heston rushed to aid the downed plane and slipped on a patch of ice. Before he got up, he was run over by an ambulance and was lifted to Elmendorf Field in Anchorage to heal. After his war years, Heston got by getting bit parts, but in 1956, he hit it big with 10 Commandments. He struck gold with the magnificent 1959 Ben-Hur, and then had another huge hit with El Cid in 1961. His last two films didn't do so good, and Heston wanted something different. Heston said yes to Jacobs within an hour of their meeting. On his flight home, he read the novel and the script, and in a personal diary he wrote, "It seems like a marvelously good idea for a film. I'd like to play in it. The rest is up to Citron." After Heston was wooed, his buddy, the director Franklin Schaffner, was brought on board quickly. Some suggest that Jacobs had courted the director in January as his Plan B director to get to Heston, but I can't say whether this is true or not. The bottom line was that the film was frozen, and Heston and Schaffner were in a battle of their own at the time. Schaffner was directing Heston in the film The Warlord, and Universal was bullying the director to end the film their way rather than what Heston and Schaffner wanted. In the end, they lost the battle, and the film was not what they wanted. But something occurred that changed everything. The Sound of Music's success made musicals hot again, and Jacobs owned the rights for Doctor Dolittle. 20th Century Fox wanted Jacobs to make that film, so Jacobs said yes, while constantly pestering the studio to make Planet of the Apes. During pre-production of Dolittle, whenever Arthur Jacobs saw head of 20th Century Fox, Richard Zanuck, he mentioned Planet of the Apes so often that Zanuck would cut him off before speaking, saying no. Dick Zanuck didn't want to hear about apes, but Jacobs never gave up, and finally, after months of persistence, Zanuck allowed Jacobs to do a test on makeup for the apes.
Dick Zanuck said, these monkeys, they're really going to be actors, right, in makeup, not real monkeys. We said, well, sure, of course. He said, what if people laugh at the makeups?
On March 8, 1966, the test was filmed, and James Brolin, with Linda Harrison, played Cornelius and Zira. Schaffner directed, with Heston being the lead. The ape test proved that the idea of talking apes was not ridiculous, and Fox seemed more open to the idea, but they still did not commit. It was around this time that Jacobs met up with his friend, actor Roddy McDowall, and told him about Planet of the Apes. He talked with me about the Apes project. He talked with me about playing Cornelius, and I thought it was all intriguing. Dr. Dolittle started shooting on June 27, 1966, and cost a whopping $17 million to make. It was plagued with weather problems, which caused the animals and cast to be afflicted by sickness. Cast complained about being bit and defecated on, and many of the younger castmates loathed Rex Harrison's entourage, who they deemed anti-Semitic. Harrison himself was a star thanks to My Fair Lady, and was stated to throw fits, quitting, returning, demanding changes that cost the film more money, like rescoring all of his music live, and there was even a plagiarism lawsuit which the production needed to settle. The film was considered a mess, but both Fox and Jacobs was committed to finishing the project. Meanwhile, Fantastic Voyage was released on August 16, 1966, and it was a futuristic sci-fi effects bonanza that made about $12 million in ticket sales. Based on that film's success, Zanuck greenlit Apes if the film could be made for $5 million. A start date for principal photography was May 15, 1967. On October 17, 1966, screenwriter Charles Eastman was officially signed by Fox to rewrite Serling's script. The screenplay would cut out the modern ape society with cars and helicopters for a smaller one, for budgetary reasons, and would combine Boulle's novel with Serling's ending. Eastman's screenplay turned out to be a bust before he finished it fully. In mid-November, He was only 27 pages in, and it was a mess of bizarre scenes, overly heady dialogue. He was quickly let go by Jacobs. The reason Arthur didn't want to pursue it with me was I took a rather light approach. To tell you the truth, I think I was lost. His replacement, Michael Wilson, was hired on November 25th, 1966 to save the day. Wilson was a World War II Marine veteran who worked under a surname as he had been blacklisted thanks to the McCarthy-era politics when he refused to answer if he supported communism or not. However, he still wrote for Hollywood as an uncredited writer. He contributed to The Bridge of the River Kwai and Lawrence of Arabia. During the pre-production of late 1966 and early 1967, the key success of the film was hiring John Chambers, who was a special effects artist who was brought in for Apes makeup. With Dan Stripke, the two would make the greatest contribution to the film, Believable Apes. Things were starting to coalesce for the film finally. After back-and-forth collaboration about the script on April 3rd, 1967, Wilson's final screenplay was turned in. The finished script is really close to the film, with a few differences. After the hunt, some apes suggest hanging a dead human on a scarecrow like a cross. During the scene where Thomas makes the flying airplane for Cornelius, he is told there is an excavation in the Forbidden Zone to prove apes come from a human society. Thomas writes in response to this, "I don't give a damn about your dogmas and your heresies. I'm an intelligent human being and I'm sick of being treated like a wild animal. I want my freedom." After helping Thomas and Nova flee while they are heading to the archaeological site, they go to Thomas's ship, which is not sunk in this version. Rather, it settles on the shallow floor of the dead lake. Cornelius wants to take items from the ship and turn them into the tribunal as proof of Thomas's claims, thus giving up, but Thomas won't do that. No ape in power can grant the existence of a culture superior to his own. All your simian myths would go up in smoke. When Thomas grabs a weapon and takes over the wagon, Cornelius considers shooting him, but Zira stops him. When they arrive at the excavation site, Nova throws up and Zira points out that she is not sick, but pregnant from Taylor during their time in the cell for weeks. Unlike the final film, Thomas escapes in a canoe instead of a horse with Nova. There are no other boats to follow him with. While canoeing, they come upon the Statue of Liberty. The last scene of the script had Zaius pursuing with apes and Thomas perched on a wall shooting at the pursuers. Zaius is shot in the arm, and then the script ends. The last page to be decided by the director and producers, who argued with Wilson for many months that Thomas should or should not die. Casting for the film began, and Roddy McDowall was picked as Cornelius, as promised by Jacobs. Ingrid Bergman was approached to play Zira, and she was interested in playing opposite Heston, but she passed. Eventually, Kim Hunter landed the part. Hunter was known for winning the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress in 1951's A Streetcar Named Desire. Hunter also had a run-in with the House of Un-American Activities Committee. She sponsored a World Peace Symposium in 1949, and for that she had a target on her back by the committee and was subsequently blacklisted. However, she survived the image and continued working where she could until this role fell into her lap. Both Hunter and McDowall were chosen because they were experienced actors. Although many complained that no one would see them because of makeup, the filmmakers knew these two apes had to have gravitas and emotion to play against Heston and to make the audience connect with him. By early April, Kim Hunter was put into her full appliance for the first time. When she saw herself in the finished product, she freaked. Jacob's lieutenant, Mort Abrahams, recalled, "Kim ran over to me and started to cry. She cried for a good 15 minutes. She was sobbing, wailing, and I put my arms around her, comforting her. Finally, she said, 'I don't know who I am. When I looked in the mirror, that is not me. I've lost myself. It was one of the most terrifying experiences that I have ever had. I've never felt like this before, and I don't know whether I can deliver what you need.' But after about 20 minutes and a cup of coffee, everything was fine. At the time, though, she was a total wreck, so emotional. McDowell had a same experience. While putting on the makeup, he fell asleep, and when he was done, they woke him up. He looked at the mirror and went berserk. For an hour, he ran around like a monkey pounding his chest. It was remarkable. I woke up in this chair, and I saw somebody looking in the mirror, and I wasn't sure that was me. Linda Harrison was cast as Nova, and she was the girlfriend of Fox president Dick Zanuck. It was classic nepotism, but in this case it worked because she was rightfully suited for the part, especially in the sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. She stated after she got the job by Zanuck, she was lectured. You go to work on time and listen to your director and do your job, and I don't want to hear any complaints about you. I just worked off two emotions, fear and love. Really, Nova fit my personality and temperament. People who can't speak are very animated. The Shakespearean actor Maurice Evans won the role of Dr. Zaius. Beyond his theater exploits, he is most known for this film and his appearance in the television show Bewitched. The final script was finished on April 18, 1967, and at the end of it, Taylor was to be shot in front of the Statue of Liberty, while Nova would run into the forest to survive another day. John T. Kelly was brought on board to polish the script, and this is when the name change for Thomas finally became Taylor. The script most resembles the film we know and love today. Kelly respected Wilson's script and never requested a credit for himself. Principal photography began on May 21, 1967. The first shots were the astronauts arriving on the planet. There were very few problems on the professional set. Eating during lunch was a problem for the ape actors, and they had to use chopsticks to eat and straws to drink. One day, when there were no straws, Heston trekked a mile in 100-degree heat to get them straws. In response to this, McDowell began calling Heston Charlie Hero, and the name stuck for the crew. The makeup artists tried their best to keep the ape actors cool, and there was a 60-foot refrigerator truck to complement them. However, when they filmed with lights in their faces, the temperatures for ape actors got to 140 degrees, which was sometimes very dangerous for all involved. At the end of the film, there was a big debate between Boulle, Heston, director, producer, and writer on how Taylor would not only meet his fate, but what he would say when seeing the Statue of Liberty. In the end, Heston used his clout to demand the end we know, because he had been playing Taylor for a couple months and knew how he should act. The toughest friction on a point of the script that I had in the whole piece was my last line. In those days, you weren't supposed to quite say that. Language was getting more permissive, but still, you weren't supposed to say, "God damn you." I kept arguing that it wasn't swearing, that Taylor was specifically appealing to God to damn all those people that ended the world. It was literal. There was no question. That was the only line you can say there. On August 10th, 1967, Planet of the Apes wrapped principal photography just after finishing Heston's first scenes where he is shaved and in his astronaut suit on the ship. While sound effects were being put in the film, and Jerry Goldsmith was orchestrating the score, Arthur P. Jacobs' Doctor Dolittle was released on December 19, 1967, and it was a disaster. Out of a $17 million budget, it made only $9 million. The movie actually cost 20th Century Fox $11 million after all proceeds were calculated. It was an astounding flop for the studio. Jacobs needed a hit to survive the aftermath, and that hit would be Planet of the Apes. And in our next video, we will explore the release and the film itself. Until then, it's time to end this party.
The party's over? Hey, come on! What do you mean the party's over? It's not even 10 o'clock, you dummy!
If you like what you see here, click like and subscribe. And if you really like what you see here, click super thanks. It helps the channel.